Hi, Karen. Great to see you.
Good to see you too. I want to make sure that I've actually got the record button on for myself. And it's so delightful to be here today with Sevilla. This is our first get together of the new year.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been really excited about this, but at the same time, kind of apprehensive because, as usual, there's so much stuff stuffed up in my brain. I don't know if I can get it out. So I really would like to just listen to you to begin with. We've been talking a lot about the importance of opponent processing.
Mm-hmm.
And then both of us were quite interested in this conversation that Jordan Peterson and John Vervaeke had, which they're calling the zombie conversation. They do get very intense with each other. And so there's a particular section in the zombie conversation where they're talking about self-organizing criticality and opponent processing and relevance realization. And I thought it might be good to start there and just clip a little piece out. Now, here's the challenge to everybody watching. I'm going to tell you where to find it in case I have to remove the video because of a copyright strike.
Oh, yeah,
Because
that's right.
sometimes I get a copyright strike on adding the video in. So we're going to play the section that starts at 59:50 in the zombie conversation. And that's right here. And we're just going to go for about a minute and a half up until the time when the ad starts.
The convergence is relevance realization says, no, what you're actually doing is you're doing something like this evolution. And what evolution, that cognitive evolution is doing is it's finding these important trade-off relationships between efficiency and evolvability, between exploiting the here now and exploring the there then, between being at the level of the features, zooming in, and being at the level of the gestalt, between looking out into the world and stepping back and looking. And so so you can think about each one of these as a domain of opponent processing, right? Like in your autonomic nervous system between the parasympathetic, and then you have this, there's meta opponent processing. All of the opponent processes are also pulling in, and so you get this multi-dimensional state space that here.
So it's like a hierarchy of dialogues.
Yes, and they're all intersecting. And so the idea was that is primarily what's coming out in the predictive, like that's how.
So
that's how precision weighting is working. It's basically doing this multi-dimensional opponent processing, this multi-dimensional complexification, this multi-dimensional evolution of your adaptive fit, and then the two models come together and they fit together, and it's like the marriage between Darwinian natural selection and Mendelian genetics. The two theories just dovetail and come together, and they converge on a solution to the frame problem.
So I just have to say, that's such a brilliant explanation of something, but he sees it as the marriage between evolution and Mendelian genetics. And I see it as a completely different picture. So for me, the picture is the picture that I get of so what he says is certainly true. You have all of these different ways of thinking that are coming into this one place, and all the different, meta structures and everything. Really, that's happening at each moment in time. That's the structure of our consciousness working. But for an artist, every stroke that I put on the paper has millions of opponent processes going on at the one time in order for that one stroke to appear. I tried to make a little graph that just shows a handful of things.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, but in reality, you have to think of this in terms of millions of intersections. So if you take this little graph, you can see there's a line between each binary, let's say small and large, or narrow and wide, or balance between yes and no. Are we going to have balance, or are we not going to have balance? I'm reading this backwards. Smooth and rough. And each one is in proportion, a particular proportion for that particular qualitative decision. And it's a little murky because you can't specify it exactly, but then they intersect at one point in time, and
That's
that's one
right.
stroke. That's one stroke of paint.
That's right. That's great. That's brilliant.
Yeah. So, but that includes every one of these principles, which are immeasurable
Mhm.
and qualitative, like unity, harmony, contrast, dominance, rhythm, variation, gradation, balance. Every one of those principles, and how each of those principles interact with color and temperature and hue and saturation, and interact with all of the different quantifiable elements of the painting, like the lines and the shapes that are in the painting, and the concepts that you're trying to achieve, or the actual representation of a person or a flower or whatever. All of that stuff is coming in at one time with this picture of this opponent processing that he's talking about, so that each stroke represents this multiplicity into that one unity. And then that unity begins to build another multiplicity out into the fullness of the painting. But when the painting is finished, if you took it apart again into all those little pieces, it would be completely meaningless. Each one of those strokes would be just like a meaningless pixel on the screen. But when they're all put together, they form a unity that is indivisible, because now it has a meaning, right? Well, that indivisible meaning starts out in the mind of the artist before the painting is ever put on the paper. And that the struggle is finding a way to represent that indivisible unity that's in the mind of the artist onto this piece of paper. And that's the experience of life. That's the way we interact with reality, and trying to understand reality and each choice that we make moving forward in life. And I think that's the way the universe is constructed.
Yeah, that's so funny, because I mean, I was about to say the same thing. I was about to say that what he's kind of touching on is one way of, because it's in the context of their particular conversation, and he's talking about these two. I don't know what the genetic thing is. What is it, Mendelian genetics? I have no idea what that is.
Oh, that was actually, was that discovered before or after Darwin's theory? Like you have two parents, one has the recessive gene
Oh
for
yeah, that sure.
brown
Yeah,
eyes, and one
yeah,
and
yeah.
so they have no, they have a recessive gene for blue eyes, but they have brown eyes because that's dominant, and the other parent has blue eyes. So there's a possibility of getting a blue-eyed child, even though one of the parents is brown-eyed. That kind of thing, or how many peas in a pod, and all of that.
Yeah, like what you learn in high school biology or earlier. So they're talking about it, in that particular way, context. But I think that you're right. I think that if you look at just the way, I mean, if you want to look at the way the universe is put together, reality is put together, I think that the clue to it is in that. Is opponent processing is it, which means something like, like if you look at the Pajot, because I've been very interested in, my book club is reading Language of Creation.
Oh, how fun.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah,
my
and
gosh,
it's the
I
same.
gotta find a book club like that. Is it online or is it in
Well,
person?
come to the come to the next one.
Oh, you have it online?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
great.
it's my group that we did the Persic books, and now we're doing this. So there's that first basic. You've got this void or whatever it is in Genesis, this darkness, this nothingness, there's no way you can describe it because it isn't anything. And from that comes the first stroke, the first reality, which is heaven and earth. That means already you've got a conjugate dualism, a pair that works together, that can't be separated, that gives meaning to the other side. And the only way you can actually perceive reality can actually exist is through something like a conjugate pair that works in opponent, opposition and together. Like together they're unity. And as time, I guess I could say, perceives, one side dominates over the other, but they can dominate over the other. Like there are times, like you could say that now is a time for example, that one mode of understanding reality is dominating over the other, which is more propositional, and all these others that are on the other side have been forgotten. But as a so as a harmony, they need to really be working in conjunction with each other, like your model, where you're making these second unconscious decisions based on basically quality, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's exactly right. It's unconscious decisions. It's not conscious decisions for the artist, because if you try to make the decisions conscious, it's the same thing as trying to dissect a frog or something,
Exactly.
right? It just takes it apart and now it has no meaning at all.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Even for a person who's never heard of the elements and principles of design, they are unconsciously,
That's right.
right, using them because that's how the universe works, and that's how we've grown up, and that's what we are attracted to when we're looking at art or when we're looking at a landscape. Those are the things that attract our eye. So it becomes an unconscious thing in the work that comes out, whether it's music or writing or painting or whatever. But if you know the principles of elements in design, then when you run into a hiccup, or if the work doesn't carry the depth or the meaning or the interest that you want it to, you can step back. You know, John talks about that stepping back, taking the long view and kind of analyzing, and then you let go of that and you move back into the flow, and then you step back. That's very much the way it works.
That's the way it works. Absolutely. And if you know, like Ian McGilchrist, who everyone likes in this little corner for a reason, because he's talking about that same kind of thing. He's talking about there's these two modes of understanding. And one of them is going to be, you know, all encompassing, seeing the totality, the gestalt, the big picture, intuition. And the other one is going to take the information from that big picture way of thinking and hone in and operate on, you know, like with a few variables that have been gleaned from this big picture. And then work with those variables to create a pattern. And then you have to go, you know, and then now you have this pattern. So you have to step back and see how that pattern can be used, and back and forth. You know, whatever you've created from these variables.
Well, it's a scientific process too. Isn't it?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, so you can't, if you start thinking in this, through this paradigm, there's nothing that can't be described or even explained by it. And I think that that's what's so mind-blowing. And this is what I found mind-blowing about Pirsig was this, that nothing can't be explained by, you know, the interpolation of static and dynamic quality.
Yeah, that's, I was telling you earlier that I spent 5 hours yesterday going through my papers. And one of the things I do when I go through my papers is I had these 2 big pieces of paper that are sort of a chart for me, where when I run into something that's a principle that I don't want to lose, I put it on one of these big pieces of paper. And so on one of these pieces of paper, I have this list of things that go on either side there. And now I have to remember to put on static and dynamic, because on the one side, there's accuracy. On the other side, there's expression.
Yeah, yeah.
Accuracy is static, expression is dynamic, right?
And you already know what it is. You already know what goes where. Once you cut something into duality, they'll always be in these two sides.
Yeah, you've got quantitative, qualitative, propositional, relational, structure, flexibility, physical, corporeal would be the way that Wolfgang Smith breaks it down.
Exactly. I mean, there's so much of that in Wolfgang Smith too, right?
Yeah. And then rules and relationship. Yeah.
And even on the quantum level, the wave particle duality is two expressions of, you know, what essential reality. There's not a difference between waves and particles. It's just there are different expressions.
Well, that's absolutely it. I mean, the stroke of paint on the canvas before that stroke is on the canvas is just a wave.
That's right.
Right. It's just the brush moving around and making some sort of maybe random decision. Maybe it's self-organizing criticality. Who knows what it is really? But that decision, when it lands on the paper, now it's a particle. That's how it works.
That's how it works.
So the language that John uses is, or John and Jordan together use this language of converging to a choice
Hmm.
or decision waiting.
Hmm.
I like that, decision waiting. Although I think it makes it static and sort of takes all the juice out of it.
Well, I
Right?
mean, the thing is, then what happens when you have a very complex conversation like what they're having?
Mhm.
Because I think that if you're looking at things metaphysically, if you're looking at one particular thing like making a painting, you can divide it up in what are reasonable dualities for the context for that project, which is making a
Mhm.
painting. I guess what they're trying to do is the same thing concerning something, and then I don't know how to define where they're looking for the convergence of these dualities in what they're talking about, but I do think that that's what they're talking about. I think that they're trying to point out through whatever lens they're looking at this with, um, that that this is the nature of reality. That's what I think this whole conversation's about.
Except that, I mean, what I always hear coming from John, and I may be
Hmm.
misunderstanding him. I mean, now I know I'm misunderstanding because I haven't watched enough of his work. Even if I had watched all of it, I could still misunderstand him. But when he comes back to talking about the one, which he does later on
Hmm.
uh, in the episode, um, I can't tell if he's saying the same thing that Jung meant when he talked about the one being the union of all human consciousnesses coming
Hmm.
together, um, dwelling in this universal consciousness together, and that one is somehow what he's talking about. Because I don't think I mean, when I think about unity and multiplicity, I think about it much more in the terms that Matthew Pajot talks about it when
Hmm.
he wrote the book, that there is a one from which all the
Hmm.
multiplicity came, and that one is um, is the one God who is manifest in three persons. So you could say you can't really say God is a person, but you can say he is a personal God. So, which I think is slightly different way of looking at it, but that the universe came from him as a gift. Um, Life came as a gift. It's not something. I was reading a really interesting article this morning that was written by Andrew Clavin about.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he wrote this article about this idea that what we are experiencing, whether I think he was talking about a book by Yuval Harari called
Hmm.
um,
Sapiens.
Sapiens, and that in that book, Harari says there really is no such thing as a nation or as money.
Hmm.
These are all just agreements that human beings make in the way that they think about it. And
Right.
when we all think about it together in the same way, then that thing exists.
Sure.
But I mean, that's a convenient way of thinking about it, and we
Uh-huh.
do use that language.
Yeah.
But the reality is, it's not just there because that's what we think about.
Yeah.
We think about it because it's there, right? We come to Don Hoffman has gone way past that, even when he says we have adopted certain ways of behaving in order to interact with the reality that's there, just to fit ourselves to it for survival, but
Hmm.
it isn't really there. Apples aren't really apples, and tables
Hmm.
aren't really tables. It's just something that we have adapted to through evolution.
Hmm.
But I'm old fashioned, and I think an apple is an apple.
I do too, and I
Yeah.
think that and this is where I really like. I'm going to bring Pirsig into it again because this is what the way of understanding that makes most sense for me. Because I'll tell you, a lot of the complexities that these guys talk about is beyond me. You know, like I can't understand it on that high level. I have to understand it on a simpler level, and this is what Persic does for me.
Mhm.
And what he's saying is that these societal rules that we have, they are actual entities in themselves. They're patterns, they're static patterns of value, but they're on a certain level. They're on a social level. So these, while while they exist as actual entities, you know, in sort of the subjective realm, let's just say, they can't be measured like, you know, like a molecule. They can't be measured in as a material entity, because they're not.
Mhm.
But they are, you know, they are evolved from the same source that created material entities. And this is, you know, so his theory encompasses all of reality as static patterns. They just happen to be patterns of value that occur within the social strata. And the social strata is actually something that has evolved out of or emerged from, really. The emergence is a much better way to understand it than evolution. Although, you know, you could say they're very similar.
Mhm.
So the social pattern emerges out of the biological patterns, which emerge out of the inorganic patterns. So that means that there's a direct relationship between them and molecules at the lowest level. And that's how, you know, that Persic's theory can encompass all of perceived reality and, you know, all of reality, is because you don't get social values until you get something that evolves from, you know, the whatever creature came up on the shore from the water. But that those things are entities as much as the creature that came up from the water, if that makes any sense.
Well, let me read you what was in the Andrew Clavin article, and then tell me how that, if it fits with
Yeah.
what you're saying.
Oh, and one thing I want to say is this is going to sound like it is just strict material, you know, scientific materialism, but all the while you have to, you know, realize that in Persic's work is a godlike force called quality
Mhm.
that is driving these things to happen, that it's just not random spontaneity, you know, there's something that is toward the good, propelled by the good, that is causing these things to happen. So it's not just strictly material evolutionary theory.
Right, there's a telos involved,
There's a
right?
telos, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, well, in Andrew Clavin's article, he's saying that Yuval Harari sort of insists that religion, nationhood, money, law, and human rights are just intersubjective phenomena
Mhm.
existing in the shared imaginations of millions of people,
Mhm.
that they are fictions.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah. Yeah.
Harari's word.
Mhm.
Harari says, none of these things exist outside the stories that people invent and tell one another. There are no gods in the universe, no nations, no money, no human rights, no laws, and no justice outside the common imagination of human beings. And Clavin goes on to say, that's not how fiction works.
Mhm.
Good fiction does not create phenomena, it describes them.
Mhm.
So it can't be a fiction because it's being described because it's actually there.
Mhm.
And to me, that's kind of the whole problem with even when I hear Peterson and Douglas Murray and Ian
Mhm.
McGilchrist and all of them. I love listening to them. They have
Mhm.
ways of talking about it that are just great. But it almost seems to me that they're unknowingly nourishing a view of the world in which that actuality is no longer there.
Yeah.
We've just
Yeah.
found a nicer way to talk about the fiction,
Yeah.
that we're going to act as if we're going to have a religion that's not a religion, or something that's going to hold society together. But if it's just a fiction, it's not going to last very long. And, you know, Harari can be the nicest guy in the world, but
Well,
if,
they say
if
he's not.
well, even if he were,
Uh-huh.
someone who says that there are no gods, there are no
Mhm.
nations,
Yeah.
no money, no human rights, no laws, and no justice outside the common imagination.
Yeah, yeah.
When the common imagination shifts, what the heck is going to happen, right? I mean, I suppose Yuval Harari then is the one that's going to tell us how to do things when
Yeah,
the
sure.
common
That's right.
imagination
No,
shifts.
I get exactly what you're saying, because at the bottom of it, including Peterson, they're having a really hard time. I mean, both Peterson and John Vervaeke, um, because like to go in the direction that you're implying, they would have to kind of somehow agree that there's a God, right?
Mhm.
And that's why I think, and I'm not going to go on and on about Persig, I've done plenty of that, but I think that Persig is compatible with believing there's a God. Not necessarily, that can work. He can work in his theory can work in Christianity, and his theory can work in Buddhism. But
Mm.
there has to be the sensibility that it isn't something random that starts with particles. And that's the problem, that if you don't somehow see something like God or something like quality as the ultimate force in the universe before this duality that happens, the separation of heaven and earth, then you're going to end up with, with a particle, right? You're going to end up with something that at the bottom is inorganic.
Well, let's take that picture and move over to organics for a second. Let's take a human being, since we're so simple to talk about. When or any multicellular organism, which Michael Levin is always talking about, his idea is that human beings are just an amalgam of all these various multicellular communities that came together accidentally, in evolution, to eventually group up in various groupings and ended up being a human being, and that we are a community of communities. Which, I mean, I can understand. It's a very useful picture, because we have
who did you say again?
This is Michael Levin.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that we're a community of communities. My heart is a community of cells that is working towards a certain project, and my lungs is a community of cells, and my blood is a certain other kind of cell, and then the bacteria that live in me are another community, and that somehow all those different communities came together to make an organism, starting with the simplest ones, obviously, and then moving up through evolutionary process. But nevertheless, a human being does arise from a unity, right? There's a gamete that's formed when a sperm and an ovum come together.
Yeah.
And that unity is what creates a human being. That unity then springs into this amazing multiplicity, which all seems to have a direction and a goal and a telos and a quality, that every one of these multicellular groupings, like Levin talks about this, he even uses this language, that when they go to build an arm, they signal to each other where to build that arm and how long the arm is supposed to be, and when they're supposed to stop, when the arm is the right length. And so obviously they're striving towards a palette, a pattern of quality that is somewhere in that cell. It's not in the DNA, though. The pattern of quality is not in the DNA. So, so you have this unity arising into this multiplicity, but then, even though I am a multiplicity, I am a unity. And my unity will join with another unity. I mean, long ago it joined with another unity, and the two of us made another unity that sprang into a multiplicity. So you can't, if you dissect a human person down into its individual cells, its individual components, you've got nothing.
Yeah.
Unless you're starting with the individual unity that starts the beginning of a human being.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right.
On the other hand, it seems that every cell in the human body carries all the information for the body, which is like completely unbelievable,
I know, isn't it?
Yeah, and not just the DNA, but lots of other information besides. And in fact, I think Levin said something one time, that in the mucosa, or in your spit, that actually they're going to come to a place that they'll be able to diagnose anything that's going on in your body just by looking at the spit.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So that's going to be something.
Yeah.
Well, shall we move on to the next little clip?
Yeah. Oh, and one thing I wanted to say though that just occurred to me is, and this is why I think that, you know, John Vervaeke is going so much in the direction of Neoplatonism. That the one he's talking about is the Neoplatonist one, Plotinus, which is, you know, and the thing is in Pajot, I think, has a very similar conception. Like the way Pajot has described God and the way Plotinus describes God are very similar. You know, they're not anthropomorphic in any way. They are this force, this force of creation and good, and is the best way I can arrive at it. So it's something that's beyond all comprehension, but we know that it's a creative force for the good. Is that your understanding of his?
Yes, but I think there's this proviso that I would make, and I think that I'm on the same page with Jonathan, and that is that when we interact with, if we can interact with God at all, we're interacting with God as one of the persons of the Trinity, either the Father or the Son or the Holy Spirit. And that is the way that God has manifested himself to man so that we can interact with him, so that because he's so far above and beyond anything that we could ever
all
imagine,
understanding,
think that we can't comprehend, we can't interact.
Yeah, totally
So,
inaccessible, right?
Right. So God manifests himself in three persons. So he is a personal God. So the New Age type people will think about God as a force. Okay. But if he is just a force, then a force is something that you can manipulate. You can plug yourself into it. You can power from this force. But that's not the way God chose to manifest himself to us. He chose to manifest himself to us as a person, a personal God, you know, the Son who incarnated into the world for a purpose, and the Father and the Holy Spirit who dwells within us. That's our relational connection to God, is with a person, because we have different types of relationships with persons than we do with forces.
Yeah.
So that's why if you're only thinking of God as the one that is this impersonal force, then you're going to be thinking a very different way about who God is and how to interact with him.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I know that there's going to be distinction between Pajot and Vervaeke. And that's it, right? What you just described.
I don't know.
I would think that Pajot would say that, you know, that God would manifest himself as a person. And I don't know if Vervaeke would say that. But I think the thing is that the conception that beyond all understanding that emanates into the world through good, through you know, the creation, through creation and good, is close enough that they can have a conversation, and that through an understanding of Plato and Neoplatonism, they can have you know, that they can have some agreement. And that's why I definitely think that this is as close as, you know, that's like getting really close for John Vervaeke.
Well, yeah, there's one point in the video where Jordan Peterson is talking about God is always receding. And I know what he means by that. I mean, however close you think you might be getting to God, you can never, you know, I mean, it's like a gnat trying to touch the moon or something, you know. It's always receding. And then John jumps in and says, yes, but he's also always coming close.
That's right.
And see, that's the personal aspect, right? That's the
Yeah.
part that says, look, I love you. I want to
Yeah.
be with you. I want us to have a relationship.
But even in that, even in that understanding, you've got that conjugate duality that we were talking about.
Mhm. Yeah.
You've got, the big picture being God and the actual manifestation being Christ, and the Holy Spirit being, the dynamic, the good that would that be, that quality, the good, the thing that drives these two parts towards the whole, that keeps the two parts united.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the scripture talks about the unity of the spirit,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And
And the spirit is the
that
thing that,
also unites all the members of the body together. It's the one
unites,
that,
allows for both sides, allows for differentiation and unity at the same time, always.
Mhm.
The glue.
Yeah, in fact, that makes me think about something that I ran into in my pile of papers yesterday. It's a quote from Guy Singstock.
Oh
He
yeah.
said, "It takes all of your freedom to deeply obey something." And I was thinking about this conjugate duality of freedom and obedience. And so I wrote, this says something fundamental about the universe and quantum physics and God's participation in the dance. If you think about the n-body problem, that's the problem where gravity can't answer exactly how planetary systems work once you get beyond, I think it's 3 bodies. Two bodies, they understand perfectly well how the moon goes around the earth and how the earth goes around the sun. But once you get beyond 3 bodies, gravity can't answer the question anymore. And so the law of gravity, whatever you claim it to be, changes in nature somehow or requires more complicated calculations the more bodies that are involved, because each one exerts its own gravity or modifies space-time or responds in its own way to space-time in response to the other bodies involved. If you multiply this effect not only with gravity, but with all the other constants that describe the structure of the universe, you can see that there needs to be both the ultimate inflexibility, freedom, in how those laws respond to each other, and the ultimate inobedience in how the universe exhibits the characteristics of these laws. So this freedom and obedience thing operates everywhere on the physical level. It operates on an artist painting, the freedom is the stepping back and getting the big picture. The obedience is coming down to the accuracy. The obedience is the static, and the freedom is the quality.
Yeah.
Right. And it's all part of that dance.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly another example of exactly what we're talking about, right?
Yeah. So let's just move ahead 1 minute in this
Okay.
we were going to take this conversation apart. Like I said, it would take 3 episodes a week for the rest of life. But let's just go there now and take a look at the part after the ad.
Okay, so
And then I'll be able to use that to talk about consciousness.
Okay. Well, I wanted to just make a segue here that people might find interesting. I think all that's modeled extremely well, particularly by symphonic music. Because what you have, if you listen to symphonic music, what you see is there's dialogues at the level of the instrument, right? So there'll be a proposition and then a counter response. And then all those dialogues are structured hierarchically in relationship to a higher order structure. And that's the melodic integrity of the entire piece. And people will align themselves with that, right? And so you can see this multi-dimensional processing occurring in a musical piece that speaks to the core issue of reality, which is actually the harmony and the beauty of the piece itself. Right? And so, and that means that deep meaning that you're describing is pointing to something like the optimized balance between multiple levels of processing simultaneously. And some of that is also temporal, right? Balancing the here and now, as you said, with the, what did you call it?
They're there and then.
Right. And so the reality is the emergent balance between all those different viewpoints rather
Right.
than any given viewpoint.
And it flows, right? Like, so think that this is perfect. Because, you know, music is basically playing with our salience landscaping for the
Yeah.
sake of playing.
Yeah.
It's computer, it's for me, it's the being mode, it's not the having mode. We're not trying to do anything. We're in pure development because we're doing pure play. We play
Yes,
music.
pure play, yeah,
Pure
play.
play,
You bet.
right?
Music is the closest. What Rex Murphy said, all music, all art aspires to the condition of music.
Right, and notice
Lovely.
how music is not in you or it's
Yeah.
it's between, it's fundamental, the resonance, the betweenness, the connectedness, the
You
fitting.
see that in dancing.
Right, and then John Rusin, in Bearing Witness to Epiphany, and I got to talk to John Rusin.
Mhm.
He said, and this is so, and he admits it because he's deeply influenced by Plato. This is such a Platonic thing. Think about how intelligibility is basically, there's a musicality to intelligibility.
Right, definitely.
Right. So there are rhythms,
Mhm.
right? And then there's melodies. Everything has its through line, which is like a melody. And then the melodies and the rhythm go together with an overarching harmony.
Yeah.
And you're getting all of this salience and right. And so music.
And that's all pointing to something like an ultimate unity in some fundamental
the
sense.
one in Neoplatonism, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I want to talk to you about that one idea too. So we'll get into that a little bit later.
But to return to consciousness.
Yes.
Okay. So and consciousness is closely associated with of course with attention, with working memory, and with fluid intelligence.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And
I think we better stop there or we're going to get a copyright strike.
That's a great section though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So Jordan is describing the symphony, the
Mhm.
music. So what came to your mind when you were listening to that?
Well, what came to my mind is like, he's talking about the individual instrument, like, let's just say, he's talking about each individual instruments adding up to the harmony of the symphony.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because like you will hear the whole harmony of the symphony as a one, but as you're listening, each individual instrument will also come out to you, you know, as a part.
Mm-hmm.
And for a moment you'll be listening to that part, and then you'll go back, you know, you go close, hear the French horn, and then you go back to the symphony. You'll go close, hear the violin section or the violin solo, you'll go back to the symphony, and throughout this whole experience of listening to the symphonic piece, you have a back and forth between these two sides.
And probably for each person, that's a unique experience.
For each person, it's a unique experience. Yeah.
Because not everybody is going to be zoning in on exactly the same
Yeah,
thing,
exactly.
exactly
Yeah.
the same moment.
Which kind of implies it's going to be, you know, your own symphony. It's going to be your own experience of totality and parts.
Well, and John made this comment right towards the end of that section. He said, in reality is the emerging balance that comes out of that. And I just want to hold up a marker on that a little bit, because there's several times in this talk when they use the term ultimate reality. And usually when they say ultimate reality, it kind of lines up with what I think of as ultimate reality. But in this particular case, if he says reality is the emerging balance, then what he's actually saying is that he's talking about the experience being between the listener and the music. That's where the experience lies,
Yeah.
which is certainly true. But that experience is only possible if the music is there.
That's right.
Right? It's not, that experience is not something that emerges out of the fact that the music is balanced.
Yeah.
That experience emerges out of the fact that the music is there. I don't know how to explain it exactly, but it seems sometimes when they're talking about these things that they're saying that that the only reality exists in this between space.
What do you think?
I think that that the music itself has a reality.
Yeah, true.
And the listener has a reality.
Yeah.
And that my experience, like you said, my experience of the music is going to be idiosyncratic to yours.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Because I am a different person than you are, and I
Mhm.
have I've had different experiences of my own connections to reality, but my but there actually is a reality that we're both.
Mhm.
It might line up with what Persig talks about as the quality,
Yeah, well, it
right?
lines up with, like these, like your subjective experience of these static patterns. Like, let's just say the symphony is a pattern. I mean, eh, the symphony is on paper, it's a particular pattern, and in playing, it's a particular pattern. And all the symphony is encompassed of multi-levels of patterns. As are human beings, we're encompassed of, biological, social, and intellectual patterns.
Mhm.
And we're a convergence of patterns reacting with another convergence of patterns, but it's only in that moment of understanding, the patterns meeting each other in that moment, that ultimate, now that is Persic, that the only reality that actually exists is that moment where subject meets the object, where the person hears the symphony. Because after that moment of perceiving the symphony, you realize what it is, and it's in the past. So
Oh,
God would be found in person. God would be found in that moment of convergence, in that quality event, he calls it.
that okay. It's getting a little clearer for me. Let me, I've probably said this before to you, but my picture of ultimate reality is that Christ himself is the ultimate reality,
Mhm.
and that um, he represents goodness, truth, and beauty. I mean, he is a real person who was incarnated in actual time, and and all of those things. But at the same time, he also represents goodness, truth, and beauty. And he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And
Mhm.
truth is another, in Greek, is another word for reality.
Mhm.
So I think it's Peterson that talks about it's so important to believe in the goodness of being.
Mhm.
And part of living is coming to the place where, regardless of what our experiences are in the world, we recognize the goodness of being.
Mhm.
And how that happens is, maybe something happens that hurts you, but in the experience of that, you also grow a little tougher, you
Mhm.
grow a little bit more courageous, you grow in many different ways. So you're always growing. And as you're growing, you're kind of pushing up against the edge of this perfection that is reality.
Mhm.
But you can never get there, which means there's always room for growth, there's
Mhm.
always room for change, there's always room for transformation. But some people tend to talk about reality as hitting you upside the head with a plank, when you have this insight, oh my
Mhm.
God, that was stupid, I have to change my course.
Mhm.
But that's not, I don't think it's really like that. I don't think it's um I think Neil deGrasse was the one who said God is not a bean counter.
Mhm.
He's not waiting with a plank to hit you upside the head every time
Yeah,
you make a mistake, but he is there to correct you and guide you and teach
that's
you
right. Yeah.
into the path that will help you to ultimately align with reality, so that you don't any longer have these experiences where you're butting your head up against something that's intractable.
Yeah.
So, um, so in that sense, our life experience is guiding us towards this place where we can fully align with Christ, where we can be fully in him as
Mhm.
he is fully in us. And but that also means that there is a reality that we're aligning to, an
Mhm.
actual reality.
Yeah.
That actual reality is Christ and his
Mhm.
truth and goodness and beauty. Not that it's just some Jungian archetype of
Mhm.
and so this is where I don't know where Persic comes down when he's talking about the social and the biological
Mhm.
and what's the other one?
Intellectual.
Intellectual quality. Is he talking about something that just arose as an emergent aspect of humanity as we evolved, or does he think there is actually a perfection of social,
I don't,
biological,
that's a question I don't know enough about Persig to answer, but I can read.
I mean, maybe it's not even an important question.
I don't know if he knows, he thinks, he would think that the patterns in themselves, this is where they are, but where are they going? You know, it's in the going, it's in the good that drives the patterns to exist in the first place that counts. So in a sense, that is God. In another sense, there isn't any manifest reality that you can point to, as in Christianity, where you say it's Christ. So that would be a difference. But I think it's kind of like Pajot and Vervaeke, where it's you know, through Neoplatonism, they get close. They're not going to be the same, because Pajot is going to say there's a manifest reality, and that manifest reality unfolds to us as Christ. I think he would say the same thing. So there's going to be that difference where, do you have are you going to identify that manifest reality as ultimate reality, or are you going to go into something that's not, you know, that's not a man, that is like God, maybe more as a force, you know, but in our experience, and it's tough because we're also limited beings in the universe, and we live and we die. So in that limitation, how can that good even be expressed at all, except for something manifest? And that's just my own dilemma with it. That's why, like, when I hear, you know, when I perceive of these two sides, Christ being ultimate reality and quality being ultimate reality, I can see it both ways, because one has to do with the fact that, you know, we're limited beings in the universe, and we're not going to be around here forever. So within the limitations, we've got to have some representation that's meaningful. But if you're talking about all of, you know, existence as we understand it, then at one time, you know, man didn't exist. So in Christianity, this is the ultimate expression. After all this evolution, the ultimate expression ends up being man. But in a more Eastern, let's just say, understanding, and Persig, I think, in my understanding, Persig takes Western conception, which is sort of Neoplatonic, and Eastern conception, which is more Taoism, and there's a sort of marriage of the two.
Well, I mean, that even sounds a lot like C.S. Lewis, because C.S. Lewis,
Yeah.
you know, at the end of Abolition of Man, he has a whole section on the Tao.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, he's not using it exactly. I don't know, because I've never studied Taoism, but the way Lewis is using it is to say there is a certain way that the world works. And there's no use in trying to pretend that it doesn't work that way. And here's how it works. And then he lays out the Tao, which is this universal reality, or universal truth, or components of truth. And which I guess is what you're saying that Persig talks about with these different aspects of quality, that in some sense, quality is quality the pattern generating force? Okay. So
well, I would say quality is the totality, and within that is dynamic and static.
And it's
and they interact with each
duality of
other.
dynamic and static that produces patterns.
Yes. Well, static are the patterns. The static are the patterns. The dynamic is the force that acts on, and you know, that it's just, let's just say, it's the pushing toward the quality, is the pushing towards the good. This is where I'm going to not make sense. So
oh, it's okay. I mean,
because it's not an exact science with this stuff, and I'm not even sure.
But the static being the patterns is sort of like then the physical laws, the laws of gravity and the constants, those would be static patterns.
Those are laws of the inorganic level. The law of
Yeah.
gravity is a law of the inorganic level.
And but then beyond that, does he say that there's a pattern, there are patterns at the inorganic level?
The patterns of the inorganic level is matter, what we see, you know, elements, molecules. Those are the patterns of the inorganic level.
Okay, and then how those elements fit together is what makes what we see. When we look at an apple, it's made up of atoms and molecules and so forth in a pattern.
Well, that would be a
pattern
biological, that would be a biological pattern because
okay,
it's
well,
alive.
a rock. If
Yeah,
you take a rock,
yeah, sure.
rock would be an inorganic
What,
pattern.
let me give a conception of Christ in Persig's model. It would be the highest quality social pattern of value. It's mankind. What is the optimal, you know, at the very top of the social hierarchy, you will find Christ.
I guess what I'm getting at is in Persig's model, does Christ arrive at that position because of the interaction of social thought and imagination? Or is Christ what
It is what
social patterns are moving towards?
it's what social patterns are moving towards.
Okay.
That's what it would be. So religion in Persig is mankind's desire to understand himself and his place in the universe. So it's going to occur, it might be informed by intellectual patterns, but it occurs within the social level.
Mm-hmm.
By dynamic quality, by quality, pushing the social patterns towards the highest, which would be Christ. In my opinion, if I were to say, he's never said that, but that's what I would say, having, from what I can gather. But there's another difference, I'd say, and this is also in Taoism and in Persig's versus Neoplatonism and Christianity, and that is that in the former, emergence is dominant, and in the latter, eminence is dominant. Is that fair to say?
Well, the
In
former
Christianity,
was
would you say that eminence is dominant over emergence?
what?
Or are they a conjugate pair in Christianity? Because I'd say, like, it seems to me in religion, there's something above drawing us toward it. And it seems to me in
So
Eastern,
when you use eminence and emergence, how would they line up with immanent and transcendent?
oh, transcendent. Yeah, that's maybe what I'm trying to say.
Okay, so my understanding, I am no theologian at all, but my understanding is that there's both transcendence and immanence.
But wouldn't it be that in Christianity that it is like what's above is dominant over what's below? Like what's above informs what's below.
What's above informs what's below. Well, in the Trinity, there is no above and below. There's total equality amongst the members of the Trinity. So when you're thinking about above and below, you could be thinking, I mean, if you're thinking about heaven and earth in the Matthew Peugeot hierarchy, heaven informs and earth expresses.
Yeah.
Right? Which I think is a really beautiful paradigm to think about. But if I could take a very pedantic example of a well-functioning corporation, you have a CEO, and then you have the hierarchy of employees, the bosses and the workers. And in a hierarchy that's functioning properly, the the workers are the dominant number,
Mhm.
dominant in number. And the CEO kind of informs the corporation of the
Yeah.
direction that we're going to go. And then the workers are, through the hierarchy, finding a way to express that
Mhm.
goal through manifest physical reality.
Yeah.
And so there ought to be not a top down, this is what you're going to do,
Yeah.
but the workers should be giving feedback back up and saying, well, this works and that doesn't work, and we can do this and we can't do that, and this would be a better way to do it. And there should be feedback all the way up
Mhm.
the organization
Yeah.
to the top. And then the top informs of the vision. This is where we're headed. And then so this whole thing is working together.
Yeah, makes sense.
I think when Jonathan talks about Christ being the top of the hierarchy and the multiplicity of humanity being down here, that even though we're at the bottom, he is continually coming down and lifting us up,
Lifting us up, yeah.
right, and
Yeah.
teaching and lifting. So I don't think it's as simple as what's on top is dominant over what's on the bottom.
I guess I was thinking that in Christianity, you're drawn up,
Yes.
and Taoism, it's more like you're being pushed from behind.
Oh, yes.
That's what I think. What I think the difference is.
Okay. And see, Jordan Peterson says both of those are necessary,
Yeah,
right?
they are both necessary. I
You
mean,
need something to draw you. You need
yeah.
something to push you from behind a little bit.
Which is why, it's like hard to say, it's if let's just say you're in my case where I can't profess to be a Christian in the traditional sense, but I can't say that I'm a Buddhist or anything like that. I find I find a lot of value in the integration of both. And I'm not 100% sure how to do that. And for me, Persig does it in a way that at this point in my life, I can get a hold of.
Well, when you were talking about being drawn and simultaneously being pushed, I think where that shows up most clearly for me in the scripture, the verse that just popped into my mind was, as one man sharpens another, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. So it's in the community that we help push each other towards the goal that we're all being drawn towards.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And partly sometimes you have to be the one who pushes yourself, kind of pull yourself up by the bootstraps. I know your time is this is your hard stop right here, so maybe this is a good place to end.
Well, that was a great conversation. So let's do this again soon. We're thinking of doing this monthly.
I would love that. Yeah.
Let's do it.
So let's get something on the calendar for February, and
okay.
We can continue with the same conversation if you want, because there's lots to plumb there.
Well, my guess is that that's probably what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Because it seems to really be colonized, this seems to have colonized both of us.
And we'll see where things go in terms of copyright strikes on using it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if just with the timestamps, I think we can, people can figure it out.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Sibylla. Happy New Year to everybody.
Thanks so much for,
I'm not sure if this is my first one that I've done since the new year. I haven't been doing very many lately, but
well, we've missed you because your channel is just so great. So I'm glad if I'm the first or one of the first, that's an honor, and I'm really glad you're back.
Thank you. And if there's anybody who's listening still at this point, if there's something that you would like me to pursue or some person you'd like me to come on here and talk, let me know, because I don't have much on my schedule, so I'm open to suggestions. Have a great day, Sibylla.
All right, Karen, you too. Bye.
Okay, goodbye.